inside a castle at the foothills of the Pyrenees Mountains. A boy prince prays over the casket of his father. And as the mourners gather and the power-hungry whisper, something even more pressing than the loss becomes evident. The crown the young prince will inherit is a precarious one indeed. The Iberian Peninsula in the late 12th century. It's a patchwork of various Christian and Muslim kingdoms, dividing the peninsula straight down the middle. In the center of the Christian half is the kingdom of León. That's Spanish for lion. But this lion has just lost its king, Ferdinand II, and his only son and heir is but 16 years old. Not exactly an age when one is usually respected by all. And that's just the start of the headaches that this poor young king is going to have to deal with. In the Kingdom of Portugal, his uncle, the late king's oldest brother, sits on his throne and has coveted eyes for the lands of León. And on the other side, in the Kingdom of Castile, the young king's cousin rules. And he'd have no qualms about going on the warpath against León, if it meant expanding his territory. On top of that, there was also a brooding sultan down south, who wasn't above making raids in southern León to gain some much-needed cash flow to fight his own civil wars. And finally, the Pope in Rome was breathing down the new king's neck to continue the glorious Reconquista, something that was not cheap. So one of the king's first acts was to levy taxes, something that was deeply unpopular. And even his own nobility were not too impressed with him, especially after he paid homage to his cousin in Castile to have his coronation supported, which still might not stop him from invading someday. In short, this kid's reign was on shakier ground than a Japanese earthquake. But incredibly, King Alfonso IX would find a solution to all his woes. And it would be a solution so revolutionary, it laid the foundations of the modern world we live in today. Parliamentary government and the rule of law. There aren't many things that separate us from medieval times, quite like rights, freedom, and of course, no kings or emperors calling the shots. But what put us on the path from dark medieval feudalism to modern-day democratic sensibilities? Well, as you can already guess, it started centuries ago when kings and queens still ruled. But if you really do think it started in England with Magna Carta, well, as I said before, think again. As you've already seen, he began his reign surrounded with dissension. So Alfonso did what any CEO of a modern-day corporation would have done. He held a meeting. But this wasn't just any old meeting. This would change history. In the spring of 1188, in the cloister of the Basilica of San Isidoro de León, the king gathered representatives of the clergy, of the nobility, And most unprecedented of all, he gathered representatives from the towns and cities of León, many of whom had rioted against him. They would represent the underclass, and they were going to let the young king have it. But to truly understand how something this modern could have come about in the 12th century, we have to go back in time 171 years to 1017 AD. Today, the Cathedral of Santa Maria de León is in the Guinness Book of World Records for having the most amount of stained glass windows in the entire world. But back at the beginning of the 11th century, it was probably a lot more humbler a building. But it was within its walls, on July 30th, 1017, that the Fuero of León was read. At this time, León needed people. It needed workers. It needed artisans. It needed tradesmen. It needed farmers and merchants. And it was willing to cut a deal with immigrants to get them to stay. So the Fuero of León contained such edicts as:
a woman's person and property shall be respected. Furthermore, a woman's right to inheritance is hereby upheld. The possession of property by the church is hereby regulated. Artisans and merchants such as coopers, bakers, butchers, and the like will have their taxes reduced. They shall not have to pay at gates for entrance. A wife shall have immunity in the absence of her husband.
As far as we know, this is the very first Bill of Rights ever written, 672 years ahead of its time. By contrast, in England, Danish immigrants were slaughtered on order of the king in 1002, and women were treated like cattle. And in France, the serfdom of peasants was by far the norm. León was light years more advanced. Fast forward to 1188, and our young king is obliged to hold the very first bona fide parliamentary session in the entire world. Demands were made, and the crown listened to every one of them. And in the end, a surprising number of brand new laws and rights were concretely written down.
All shall have rights to private property. A person's home shall not be violated. Young women may choose whom they marry, regardless of their father's wishes. There shall now be the right to appeal to justice opposite the king. And henceforth, the king must seek counsel with the Cortes before entering or starting any wars.
Many more laws, rights, and freedoms were established and recorded into what historians now call the Carta Leonese. The very concept of constitutional parliamentary government was created here 27 years before Magna Carta was written in England. And at any rate, Magna Carta was a failure. The King of England threw it out the window. Unlike Alfonso IX, who may have had little choice than to agree to all the progressive changes, but nevertheless would honor them throughout his entire reign. The old Fuero de León was also upheld and perpetuated, and for the century to come, rights and freedoms would be the norm. 599 years later, in 1787, When the founding fathers of the US of A were drafting the Constitution, they studied the Cortes of León as an example of progressive government. Which is why the likeness of Alfonso IX's grandson, Alfonso X, can be found in the House Chamber of the White House, along with 23 other historic lawmakers. Alfonso X carried on the tradition of advancing human society, so much so that he earned himself the nickname of the Wise. The famous Australian political theorist John Keane has written that the Cortes of León was instrumental in perpetuating the parliamentary system across Europe and ultimately around the world. In 2013, none other than UNESCO recognized the Cortes of León to be the cradle of modern parliamentarism. And here we are, in a world full of parliamentary governments that we can all be proud of. Like my own parliament here in Ottawa, Canada.
Why does this government treat Alberta like a fart in the room?
I heard her say a word that I know is distinctly unparliamentary. The word was F-A-R-T.
Never mind.